Kraven the Hunter is one of my favorite Spider-Man villains, and so I am super excited that even though it's being produced by Sony, who doesn't necessarily have the best track record, there is a Kraven the Hunter movie coming out. However, I'm a sad little wahoo because the movie has gotten pushed from this October until next August because of the writer's strike. So, to bring myself a little bit of comfort in these troubling times, I decided to do another character keys video where I talk about 5 different keys at 5 different price levels so that if you love this character as much as I do, you can find a cool book to add to your collection no matter what your budget. So if I had $5 to spend, I'd be looking to pick up a copy of New Avengers number 10, which reveals that Kraven was once a part of an old group of Avengers that Nick Fury put together back in 1959. And I think that's really cool because it shows that Kraven has been kicking butt and taking names for decades. And this storyline is just really entertaining, especially his interactions with Sabretooth. He's also part of this Avengers squad. So of course, they're supposed to be kind of good guys, but they hate each other and have this rivalry. And so Kraven just keeps shooting him in the face, but it doesn't really matter since Sabretooth has this healing factor. But it's just kind of fun dynamic between them. And so for that reason, I really love this book and that storyline. Now, if I had $10 to spend, I'd be looking to pick up a copy of Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man number 244, when it's revealed that the Chameleon, who is another one of Spider-Man's greatest enemies, and Kraven are not only associates, which they had been since Kraven's first appearance, but they're actually half-brothers, which of course makes for a really interesting dynamic that is explored in the comics and that I'm excited is even going to be explored in the movie. If you haven't seen the Kraven trailer, make sure you go watch it after you finish this video and you'll see the Chameleon has been cast and there's just going to be a lot of interesting family conflict that ends up being resolved one way or the other in the movie, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that's done. But it's here in this issue that you find out that they're brothers for the first time. In addition, this issue also contains the first appearance of Alexei Kravenov, who is Kraven's son and who eventually assumes the mantle of Kraven the Hunter. And that reality brings me to my next pick, because if you have $20, you can find out why there needed to be a successor to Kraven if you pick up a copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 294, which is the climax of probably Kraven's most notorious storyline called Kraven's Last Hunt. And so in this storyline, Kraven realizes that he's getting old and he's getting past his prime. And as this person who has always taken so much pride at being at the peak of his physical abilities and the peak of humanity, he has an existential crisis and can't deal with this. And so he decides that he's going to go on his last hunt. And so this ends with him finally beating Spider-Man convincingly for really the first time. And he ends up burying Spider-Man alive. And while Spider-Man is buried, he then takes on the Spider-Man suit because he wants to prove to himself that he is the best of the best. Again, he's having this existential crisis. And so he sets out to defeat the one bad guy that Spider-Man was never able to defeat by himself, which is a villain named Vermin. And so Kraven hunts down Vermin and just destroys him. And so he realizes that he's proved all that he has left to prove. And he realizes that Spider-Man is eventually going to unbury himself. And so he goes and writes a note which explains his actions and his motivations to Spider-Man, because he does consider Spider-Man a man of honor. One of the things I love about Kraven is that he has this strong sense of honor. So even though he's a villain, he lives by a code, and I always find that a really interesting dynamic and always really look up to people who live by a code. And so he does. But again, this code sadly means that he can't accept aging. And so this note isn't simply a note of explanation, but it's a suicide note. And so he ends up taking a gun and blowing his brains out. And I read this book as a kid, and I was really traumatized by it. I had just started reading comics, and I was really naive and young, and I opened this comic, and all of a sudden, this very dark moment happens. And I was actually really scared, and so I wouldn't pick up a Spider-Man book again for a while, even though he's now my favorite hero. I was just scared to read his books, and I was especially afraid of Kraven. And so for a long time I just hated the character of Kraven because I had all these scary memories of him. But now, obviously, as an adult, I can appreciate a lot of the themes and a lot of the story that was being told about him, and the commentary on age, especially for men, and how we struggle with it. And so I really appreciate this story. And if you want to have the most famous Kraven moment of all in your collection, then you can have it for only $20 if you pick up this issue. Now, before we get to the next keys, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, of course, I'd appreciate if you consider doing so now. All right, next we're gonna jump up in price a little bit, and if you have $150, you can get a nice copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 47, which is probably Kraven's most famous cover. And so if you really want to get a beautiful Kraven cover, this is one that is done by the famous John Romita. And finally, that brings us to the Grail, which of course is Amazing Spider-Man number 15, which contains the first appearance of Kraven and begins this wonderful journey that he has with Spider-Man. And I think something that's interesting about this character is that, of course, a lot of the early Spider-Man villains, like the Lizard, the Vulture, Dr. Octopus, were all kind of playing on the fact that Spider-Man was an animal kind of character, but now all of a sudden you have a hunter. And so it's really kind of plays again on that fact that Spider-Man has this animal part of him. And obviously this gets explored all through Kraven's history. And even there's this really cool storyline that came out a few years ago where he rounds up kind of all of Spider-Man's animal-themed villains and he starts hunting them down. And so in a universe where you have all these animal people, I think it's really interesting to have this person who wants to hunt them. Now, before I go, I've got 5 bonus keys for you, beginning with Spider-Man number 47, which is significant for a few reasons. First of all, it's the first appearance of another one of Kraven's sons who took on his mantle for a time, Vladimir Kravinoff, who becomes the Grim Hunter. And it's also the first appearance of Gregor, who you find out was a friend of Kraven and who later took on Vladimir as his ward and ended up training him. And so it's a really important character to Kraven's story. And so I like this book for that reason. And also in terms of important characters related to Kraven, we have Amazing Spider-Man number 209, which is the first appearance of Calypso, who becomes one of Kraven's love interests. And the reason she's important to his story is that he gets most of his powers from like voodoo and herbal potions and things like this. And so she is part of helping him power up his game. And also he ends up falling in love with her, of course. Next up, we have Sensational Spider-Man Annual number 1, which is really cool because it has a story called Kraven's First Hunt, which actually retells his first appearance from Amazing Spider-Man number 15, except this time the story is told from Kraven's eyes, and so you don't get all that Spider-Man bias in it. So it's a neat story, and it's also the first time where we get this hint that Kraven and Chameleon might actually be related. Next up, we have Amazing Spider-Man number 16 from the 6th volume of that run. And this is significant because it's the first appearance of the last son of Kraven. Now, who is that? Well, Kraven has a complicated history. He was eventually resurrected, but he didn't have an heir that he really believed in. He was actually upset with his real sons through how they had resurrected him. And so he goes to see one of my other favorite characters, the High Evolutionary, and I have a whole video about him. You can go back and look at it sometime, and ask him to create 87 clones of himself. And so all of these clones he considers to be his sons, and he trains them like they are his sons, and he sends them out into the world. And one of those sons thinks that he's the best and just despises how weak the others are, and he goes and kills the rest and presents their skulls to his dad. And so his dad looks at him and says, "Oh, wow, you really are my true heir." And so he turns over the mantle to his son, and then he's actually ready to die again. And so he takes on the Spider-Man suit once again, and this time he goes to fight his last son, and his last son kills him and gives him peace, and then he's actually able again to take on the mantle of Kraven the Hunter fully. And finally, we have a bit of a pricey one, and this is Tales of Suspense 58, which contains the second appearance of Kraven. And as we always talk about, if you're priced out of the first appearance, then the second appearance is a good consolation price. And this book is also famous because it contains this classic battle between Captain America and Iron Man that you can see on its cover. So tell me in the comments below which of these keys is your favorite, or what is your favorite Kraven storyline, or just some other thought about Kraven. And again, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, of course, I'd appreciate if you consider doing so, liking the video, all these things to help our channel grow. Thanks for watching, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.